Relationships are the way that we move through life and the way that we learn. So let's talk about relationships today. My name is Anna. Welcome to Ruhani Wellness Center. And there are 3 things that I would like to talk about today in terms of relationships. The first one has to do with it being an encounter, which means it's a crash of realities between 2 people. That's the first thing to consider. The second one is about placement. So what's the distance, what's the dance, what's the shape or the social form of this relationship? And the third one has to do with the fact that a relationship is never something steady. It is always transforming, so it's a being on its own. So let's talk about those 3 things. When it comes to relationships being an encounter or a crash of realities, what I mean is everyone comes with their own story, their own background, and their own lens through which they see reality. So when you step into someone's life, they're going to see you through that lens and you're going to see them through your own lens. So a lot of the times when we're in a similar or in the same situation and we're having the same experience, we're in the same moment in space and time, we may be having 2 very different interpretations of what's actually happening. We may be having 2 different experiences in one. So when these two realities crash into each other, the thing is, a lot of times we don't really know what's going on someone else's internal perspective. So there's a phrase that goes, I say what I say, and you listen what you listen. So when it comes to communication in between the relationship, because it is a crash between 2 realities, that's sort of what happens, no? Somebody will come up and say something with their body language, with an action, or with their actual words, and we're gonna interpret whatever it is that we interpret that has to do more with us than with the other person. Then that also has a lot to do with the love languages, and this is a very good tool when it comes to personal relationships, because we all have a different way of expressing love to one another. So if you want to learn more about that, I recommend you seeking the love languages, because sometimes when someone is giving you a gift, that's a way of saying I love you, but to someone else, honoring them by helping them with a task or giving them a hug may be the right language to speak up that affection that they feel. So that's the first thing to consider in a relationship. It's an encounter between 2 realities, and I need to really understand that it's my world crashing into your world, and that these 2 circles are merging, and that we only have the space between the circles, that intersection, to actually relate in. So keep that in mind when you're relating to another human. The second thing is about placement. So after this encounter happens with another, where do I position myself in relation to this other person? So that's what's gonna begin to create the quality of the bond. It's gonna begin to say and determine what's the shape of the relationship. So I always like to talk about distance, because some relationships work pretty well over here. For some other relationships, we may need more space right around here. And for some other relationships, we may need to be way over here. So I have friends that I love, but I may not be able to live with them or travel with them. Or my relationship with my mother may be really close, but eventually maybe I will need more space. So finding the correct distance in a relationship and playing with this movement, even with your hands, and just say, this is me, this is the other person. How does it feel? Is it this close? Is it this close? Is it this distance? And that will help you determine also the quality of the bond. And it doesn't mean that further is less quality and closer is more quality. It just has to do with the dancing. So we're gonna dance very differently if we're here than if we're here. So our relationship may need to have more closeness for it to develop to its fullest potential. But some relationships actually cannot develop when they're this close, because you both need more room to show each other your own personal potential. So this has nothing to do with if it's like a colleague relationship or husband and wife relationship, but it has to do with how much space people need. And that has to do a lot with the patterns of attachment that we have. So if you're interested in that, you may also look into patterns of attachment, and it will really help you understand why some people need more closeness and some people need more space. So the other part of placement in a relationship is the distance, and then we have the social form of it. Is it a social relationship? Is it a work relationship? Is it a personal relationship? And that will also be given an external form that you can then bring this third being into society. Then we have the distance. We have that social agreement that you may need or may not need to name. It depends on you, and it also sometimes just comes. If it's a work relationship, I will know. If it's a friendship, I will know. And then the third aspect is the dance. So once we have a distance, what kind of dynamic are we having on that distance? Is it a relationship where someone is teaching the other person something? Is it a relationship where we are both creating something together? Is it a relationship where you move and I follow you around, or I move and you follow me around? Is it a pulsation where we're both going apart and then coming together? So what is the special dance and shape that this particular relationship is taking? Again, it may be a personal relationship, it may be a romantic relationship, a business relationship, it doesn't matter. What is the shape? Now I'm talking about the way that that shape is dancing. Because also with a particular social relationship, let's say your boss, you may have a very natural way of confronting each other where it's actually very horizontal, or he may be seen as a master or a teacher to you, or maybe he's actually seeing you as someone that he can bring in and nurture the company. So regardless of the shape, what is the dance? So that's also about placement. The third thing to consider once we had this crash of realities, this encounter, and then we learned what is the dynamic and the placement between these two beings, then the third thing to consider is that the relationship itself, the bond itself, is a being on its own, no? And it's always constantly changing. So a relationship is always either evolving or dissolving, but it's never really steady. It's always moving, it's always shifting, and it's always changing. Especially the more personal the relationships get, the more they tend to keep shifting and evolving or dissolving. So especially in long-term relationships, if you think about them as a being that is growing, it's as an almost an individual, as a third individual. Think of it as a child that it's growing, and what's interesting to that child when he's 2 years old is going to be very different from when that child is 15 years old or 30 years old or 50 or 60. So especially in long-term relationships, we can see how the dynamic will constantly be changing, and how the closeness and the distance that we need and the attachment patterns in that relationship are going to change, because both individuals are always going to change. So that brings me to another thing that's important in relationships, which is about the compatibility that these two people have. Because we might have been very compatible because we both wanted this, but now I may be wanting something else, or I may be needing something else. So then you either adapt to that, or we decide that the relationships needs to dissolve, or the shape needs to change. So consider it a being of its own, and that it's always going to be growing and changing, and then maybe even dissolving. A good tip here would be to take care of the present needs of our relationship without caring so much the history or the past of it, because again, it's always changing. So what we needed when our relationship was like this might be very different from when it was like this, or when the relationship was like this and now we're growing closer and closer. We may be needing different things from each other, or maybe you are supporting me and now I'm supporting you. So what's the need of the relationship of this third being in the present? It's always going to be a healthy thing to look at. And so if you think as a relationship as a person having developmental stages, it's also interesting to see how for some of us, we are more comfortable in some stages of the relationship than in others. For some people, they may be very comfortable meeting new people in work environments, or they may be really comfortable in the pursuit and the seduction of a new partner. So they may really like the beginning of a relationship and the getting to know new people. For some people, that is exhausting, and it makes you super anxious. And then for some people, they're really comfortable with long-term relationships that are committed, where you really know me and I really know you. And for some other people, that may be terrifying. So it's also interesting to see that if relationships were a person on its own with their own developmental stages, what stage of the relationship do you feel more comfortable in, and do the people around you feel more comfortable in too as well. So this also may explain how some of us, we keep changing the person in a specific role in our life. So an authority figure that may represent, I don't know, my father, I may be needing to change that. So I may be wanting to change jobs and get a new boss. Or I may be really comfortable with the seduction and the pursuit of the romantic relationship, but I'm not so comfortable with intimacy. So I may be also shifting partners really quickly. So that's also an interesting thing to look at. So those are the 3 things I think we need to consider. The encounter, it's a crash of 2 completely different realities. Then the placement of that encounter. Where do I position myself in relation to this person? And then the relationship itself being a being on its own that is always evolving or dissolving. So I hope this brings some clarity, and please leave me your comments. I'm also super interested in seeing if this makes any sense at all. And I want to keep doing videos deepening on each one of these points. So let me know if there's any of them that you find interesting. Again, thank you for watching. This is Rouhani Wellness Center. I hope you have a great day.